Welcome to All Things Apostolic, where you get the latest apostolic news and analysis, where you can participate in exciting Pentecostal developments, and where you just might learn something interesting about your world. And now, your host, Dr. Nathaniel J. Wilson.
Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. This is All Things Apostolic, and I am Nathaniel Wilson, and we have a good time here every week, and I'm glad that you are tuned in with us. We're going to have some, I think, important discussions today. Our website, for those of you who want to know, is allthingsapostolic.com. allthingsapostolic.com. And our phone number, for those of you who would like to call in and leave a message, is 916-900-2724. 916-900-2724. So we'd be happy for you to do that. And and if this is your first time to join us, I want to give you a special invitation. Every week we meet here on Holy Ghost Radio. We meet here on Monday nights at 7 o'clock, that's Pacific time, and Tuesdays at noon, and Fridays at 4 p.m. So we're glad to have you along, and we hope you come back and be with us on a regular basis. Great things are happening in the month of August. Two great youth meetings have taken place, the Peak Conference and the Youth Congress. The Peak Conference was held in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was wildly successful with the biggest attendance ever, significantly larger than any year in the past. And as these several thousand, 5,000 or so young people gathered together and had a tremendous time, and the teaching and preaching was over the top. Great time. Music was great. People were great. And every year, Peak grows and becomes more successful. This is also, every other year, this is the month that the Youth Congress of the United Pentecostal Church was conducted in Indianapolis, Indiana, and over 30,000 young people gathered there. Well, they weren't all young. I'm sure that people of all ages were there. And so this is ended up to be a great meeting with some tremendous preaching, and preaching that's much needed in the apostolic movement. God give us more preachers that are preaching like the men at Peak preached and like those at the Youth Congress preached. So it's a good month, a lot of good things happening. In Hope Corps, which is true boot on the grounds involvement of apostolic young people in ministry around the world, first in training and then in ministry around the world. So there were, over the summer, let's see, there was 7 or 8 intensive training weeks where these young people who have all come together to study in Wilson University and complete 12 units of their bachelor's degree. And it's all apostolic studies on leadership and ministry and spiritual formation and personal development. And then after that is over, they go to an ITW, intensive training week. The majority of these are held in New York City or the island of Roatan in the Caribbean. These are incredible times. There's also one in Oslo, Norway. There's one in the Philippines. And there has been some in Italy. And so they're in various places where we get exposed to the broader picture of the world. And we realize that our hometown is great, but it's not the whole world. And so this has been a tremendous blessing. Hope Corps graduates become the leaders in their churches, in dozens of churches across America. These Hope Corps students become leaders at home. and they then participate in ongoing lifelong ministry. And those are exciting developments that are taking place. So if you have not been a part of Hope Corps has a website. Go to the website, hopecorps.com, I guess it is, and learn about it. And it's not just for young people. There are many, many married couples, and I think our oldest Hope Corps graduate, I think, was 78 years old. And so you can be a part of that. All of this is going on. There are good things. Now, I'm well aware that there's a lot of things going on that are troubling and challenging to apostolic, Pentecostal, New Testament Christians. There are people compromising. There are churches that are decaying. There is leadership that is more in love with the world than they are with the things of God. Just this week, I had someone tell me that some pastors of churches in a particular group were complaining about Wednesday night. They said, people don't come and it's boring. And so I'm thinking, well, if it's boring and people don't come, Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. So if people don't come, then is there something that the ministry needs to be assessing about themselves instead of griping about the people? So with all of that going on, there is in some ways the greatest revival that I have seen in my lifetime, and many others attest to the same thing. There's growing churches that preach holiness, that have standards of holiness, that have separation from the world, that love God, who are focused on spreading the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ around the world. There's a growing number of these churches all over America and beyond. So this is not a bad time. This is a good time. Now, let me just mention again, if you want to contact us, it's allthingsapostolic.com. And our phone number is 916-900-2724. So we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to email us. We'll try to respond and communicate with you. The internet is a tremendous thing. We've never had these opportunities for communication before, but now we do have them, and God has blessed us to be able to utilize these, both audio and video, where you can see and participate in discussions about real, true, current issues, opportunities, and possibilities in the Holy Ghost-filled apostolic church. Amen. And it all starts in faithfulness to our local churches, and faithfulness to our pastor, and faithfulness to what God is doing and wants to do on the local level. So, thank God for that. Now, in our time, there are a lot of challenges. We've been through the modernist century, which was the 20th century, and there is a marked change that when January the 1st, 2000 came, it set off literally a change in our world that has been identified by sociologists and others as now we're in the postmodern world. In the 20th century, we were in the modern world. Now we're in the postmodern world. So people that do not understand, and it's a real thing, it's not just words. People do not understand the change to the postmodern world, or are not cognizant, or don't believe that there's a change, they're just being left out. They don't understand what's happening. And as a result, the world is moving past them, and they are sitting atrophied somewhere, not understanding these things. But with this world, one of the things in the postmodern world is that people want reality, and there's many terms that are used. Deconstructionism has taken place, and people are seeking community, and they seek reality, and they're not interested in all of the formal structures that were established in the 20th century, and people had to give slavish allegiance to those structures. They want real stuff. So with that, there's also, with all of this change, there's also a lot of unrest, and there's a lot of anxiety that people have. And with the coming of the internet and the cell phone and the connectivity, there's also exposure to all kinds of things that are, in fact, dangerous. Last week, I just read about, for example, a woman who is a hunter. And in the news, it had her picture, and she looked like she was in her 30s. She was a nice-looking woman. She had a smile on her face. She was holding an animal that, in her hunting, that she had shot, and smiling and happy. But in the news report, she had just committed suicide. And her suicide they attributed to the fact that on the internet, she was excoriated by people who were against hunting to the point that she became so shaken by it that she took her own life. So we're hearing about all this bullying on the internet, where I just read a text of young people in our own church that one had written to another that got in a fuss about a boy or something, it was a horrible text that was making fun of the other young person and denigrating them and denigrating their looks, and I thought about those on the internet that have actually committed suicide because people said all these horrible things about them. And the old saying that sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me, of course, is not true, because words also have the power to penetrate. And these attacks that all of that in years gone by, there was no anonymous way to do all of that, or at least no convenient anonymous way to do all of that. So it is a world that for young people is fraught with anxieties. The world for adults and people in the workforce is growing faster. The challenges that face them and parenting and the challenges of marriage, and even if people are not married, the challenge of relationships, all of these things are increasing the load of fretfulness that many people are experiencing. So what's an answer? And that's not just people in the world, that's people in the church too that experience these things. So what is the answer to these things? And people are turning increasingly in the world to drugs, and I might say people are also turning to legal drugs, and can't hardly make it without taking a pill of some kind that will help them sleep or that will get them through the day and so forth. Well, for the people of God, that certainly should not be the necessity to be able to operate. We ought to be able to do better than that. So where do we find the therapy that will give us the victory and a positive outlook in our lives every day? Well, I want to suggest to you today that one of the places that we find this that is irreplaceable is in prayer. And if you're going to talk about all things apostolic, then one of the things that's certainly apostolic is prayer, and you have to include prayer. So there's ways to look at prayer, and so when I say the word prayer and the idea of duty comes to someone's mind, then we have to back up and say that is kind of a habituated response to the idea of prayer. That I do this because this is my duty to do this, because the Bible teaches me that I ought to pray. Well, that's not the concept of prayer that you and I ought to have. The concept I think that is appropriate and that the Lord indicated in giving us the Lord's Prayer is not that prayer is simply duty, but that prayer is therapy. And that prayer is a medium for maintaining our balance and maintaining our strength and being able to continue to move forward successfully in our lives and to move forward with power in our lives. So when you read the book of Psalms and you see the prayers of David and of the psalmist, you see the place and the role that it played. In one point, Psalm 55:17, David says, "Evening, morning, and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice." These are indicators that when the pressure was on, even for a monarch, even for a king, when the pressure was on, he understood the importance of prayer. So are you praying? Do you pray? What is your feeling about prayer? Do you understand prayer? Do you know how to pray? All of these things become a part and parcel of the process when we talk about just saying, well, we need to pray. So I would suggest that Jesus gives us the model for prayer in what has come to be known by most all of us as the Lord's Prayer. And this is recorded in Matthew chapter 6. The Lord's Prayer is found there, Matthew chapter 6, and it begins at verse 9 and goes through verse 13. And I would like for us to take a few minutes today and talk about this. The fact now is that obviously the Bible clearly instructs us to pray, but the question often comes, I don't know how to pray. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And many feel bad about this, and their prayer life is lacking because they simply feel a little bit lost when they begin to pray. So the fact is, though, that we shouldn't feel too bad because the disciples of Jesus also felt that way. And as a result of that, said to Jesus, "Lord, teach us to pray." And he did teach us to pray. So today, we have a teacher who knows more about prayer than anyone else in the world. And our teacher today is Jesus himself. He is going to teach us about prayer in what we call the Lord's Prayer. So let's take a look at it. First, let's take a drink out of my trusty Wilson University cup. For those of you that have joined us late, this is All Things Apostolic, and you can join us in communication with us at our website, allthingsapostolic.com, and you can call us at 916-900-2724. So feel free to do that. We would love to hear from you. So in looking at prayer here, the Lord gives us, when they said, "Lord, teach us to pray," he gave them a model for prayer. And that's what's found in Matthew chapter 6. Now, it's okay to simply quote the Lord's Prayer. It's okay to quote the Lord's Prayer while you're praying. However, the Lord's Prayer, as we know it, was not intended to simply be quoted. It's all right to quote it, but it's not simply intended to be quoted. It is also, beyond that, it is also a step-by-step model or introduction to the structure of prayer, the appropriate structure of prayer, where we should start our prayer, how we should start our prayer, and then how we move through that prayer to its conclusion. Once we get this down and get this teaching straight from the Master's mouth, then prayer becomes a whole lot different perhaps than what it's been for many of you in years gone by, or maybe in your whole life. And so let's look at this, the Lord's Prayer. He begins by saying, "Our Father, which art in heaven." Our Father, which art in heaven. The very first thing we want to note is that when you start praying, it does not start with "my Father who is in heaven." It starts with the plural pronoun "our Father," which is in heaven. It's not me, it's us. And this immediately leads us to contemplation of a very important Christian concept. And that is that Christianity is not a religion that can find its fulfillment in isolation. There is no way to be a full Christian and live your life dodging life and dodging people and dodging everything else, or dodging the church, because it all starts with our Father which art in heaven. In fact, one of the most dramatic and pronounced characteristics of this Lord's Prayer is that there is not one singular pronoun in the entire prayer. Not one time does it say I or me, but it constantly speaks in the plural. Our Father which art in the heavens, give us this day, and so forth. When you think about that, then you recognize that all of us are in this together. Now, that's not all bad. In fact, that's wonderful. It tells us something that's true. First of all, humans are not made to live outside of community. They're made to live in community. Particularly, people that are saved are to live in community. This is part of the very clear instruction in the Bible that to forsake not the assembling of ourselves together. Part of Christianity is, the core to Christianity is our personal experience with God that ushers us into community life. That's why the church is sometimes called a faith community. It's ushered into community life. We are together. There is no way to be a biblical Christian and avoid the local church, or fail to find a local church that is a Bible-believing, truth-proclaiming church, and become a part of that church, a faithful, loyal member of that church. It all starts with our. Now, it's easy to say, well, I don't like people, or I'm a timid person, which is what most people think, or I avoid controversy, or I don't want to get involved with people. All of that has to be laid aside, and you have to understand that it all begins with our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So it's you and me, and it's tens of thousands of other people, and all of us are in the church together, and there is no way to avoid that. So to start with, before we even get into the prayer, the very first word, our, we need to assess, is part of my problem because I constantly work towards isolation? Do I acknowledge leadership? Do I share in the vision of the church? Am I involved in the mission of the church? Am I engaged in encouraging others in the church with a smile and a handshake? Do I worship collectively when the body corporately is worshiping? Do I participate in the singing, in the hymns, in the praise, in the giving, in the preaching, and in altar services? Am I someone that's there encouraging people who have come to pray, or am I just sitting back? All of these things don't only have to do with the welfare of the church. They have to do with the welfare of you, of yourself. And so those that are not doing that, you don't have to get on the housetop and say, I'm making a big change. But there needs to be a re-evaluation and a readjustment of how you view the kingdom of God. It is not simply a jacket that is put on at times and taken off at a time. And it's also not just something that is a prerogative. If we are to live for God, we are disciples. And as disciples, we are part of the body of Christ. And so there's no way to disassociate ourselves from that and still be in a healthy position in regards to our spirituality and our discipleship. So the second thing you notice here in just a brief and cursory reading of the Lord's Prayer is that the whole first half of the Lord's Prayer is about Him. It's about the Lord. Only when you get in the second half of the Lord's Prayer is there anything about ourselves. So, oftentimes when people start praying, it's because they may have felt like they did something wrong, or even if that's not the case, when we start praying, many times it's about us. Oh God, I need you today. Oh Lord, I need your presence in my life today. Oh Lord, I. But when prayer starts that is modeled after what the Lord gave us. Somebody says, well, I did something wrong. I need to ask forgiveness. Yes, and there's a place where you can just stop and say, God, forgive me of my shortcomings. However, in prayer, when you let the focus, in the first half of that prayer, when you let the focus be yourself instead of the focus being God, you're making a mistake. And the therapeutic value of prayer is undermined by not remembering that the first thing that you do is that you put Him first in prayer, like we are supposed to do in the rest of our lives. And when we put Him first, the first way we do that is we worship Him in praise and in acknowledgement of His greatness. Now, this is an important point. We're going to have to take another session to finish this, but this is an important point. That our prayers start with acknowledgement of God's greatness has everything to do with prayer being effective in therapy to us. When we feel overwhelmed by the problems, when the mountains that we face seem too big, when we are frustrated by our inadequacy and we feel small or unwanted or incapable of succeeding, all of those feelings, getting rid of all of those feelings has everything to do with starting your prayer on a daily basis, starting your prayer with our Father which art in the heavens. It is a putting, number one, a putting of God first in our minds instead of my problems. Now this is a little bit of psychological realities that come with understanding the Lord's Prayer. We are forcing ourselves to quit thinking about our problems and how big they are, which becomes a form of idolatry because we're supposed to be thinking about God and how big He is. And when we think about how big God is, it begins to, you're already figuring this out, it begins to reduce the size of our problems because our problems in comparison to God are small. This is why we start the prayer with our Father which art in heaven. And actually the word heaven there is plural. Well, the word heaven is always plural, but it allows us to say, and I think the original meaning is this, is that our Father which art in the heavens. He's not just in a city somewhere called heaven, but He is in the heavens, our Father which art in the heavens. Immediately that expands my mind from thinking about my problems and my issues, and I'm thinking about the God who is universal. Our Father which art in the heavens, you're so much bigger than everything that's going on earth. Everything that I'm thinking of on earth, you're so much bigger than all of that. Our Father which art in the heavens. Hallowed be not my problems, but hallowed be thy name. And so the exaltation of the name of the one that fills the heavens, the transfer of our thinking process as an individual from our little world that seems so bound up in our problems, the catapulting of our minds into the bigger world that we certainly are a part of. And as people of God, Paul makes clear in the book of Ephesians repeatedly that we are a heavenly people. We are connected to the universality of the work and triumph of Christ, which conquered not only sin and death and hell and the grave, but conquered the universal curse of sin in the whole universe. And now he rules and reigns. And we see him in Revelation chapter 5 as being praised and worshiped. Well, listen, my time's up, but we're going to continue with this. This is All Things Apostolic, and I am Nathaniel Wilson. Contact us at allthingsapostolic.com. God bless you.
A production of allapostolic.com.